The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Detective Marcus Blackwood's study, creating rivulets that distorted the gaslight flickering in the street below. The year was 1923, and Manhattan's Upper East Side bore the sophisticated veneer of post-war prosperity. The shadows of uncertainty lingered in every corner of society. Blackwood sat behind his mahogany desk, fingers steepled, contemplating a particularly vexing case involving insurance fraud when the sharp ring of the telephone shattered the evening's tranquility. "Blackwood speaking," he answered, his cultured British accent cutting through the static. "Detective, thank God I've reached you." The voice belonged to Inspector Carter of the New York Police Department, though his usual composure seemed fractured. "I need your assistance with the most perplexing matter. A death has occurred under extraordinary circumstances." Eleanor Hayes looked up from her typewriter in the adjoining office, her keen ears detecting the urgency in the distant voice. She had served as Blackwood's assistant for 3 years, and her intuition for sensing significant cases had proven invaluable. Rising quietly, she approached the study doorway. "Go on, Inspector," Blackwood encouraged, reaching for his fountain pen. "What manner of extraordinary circumstances?" "The victim is Reginald Ashworth, the renowned art collector, found dead this morning at his estate, Ravenshollow, up in the Adirondack Mountains. The local authorities are baffled, Detective. The circumstances suggest both natural death and something far more sinister." Blackwood's gray eyes sharpened with interest. Reginald Ashworth's name appeared regularly in society pages, his collection of rare paintings and antiquities the envy of museums worldwide. "Continue." "Ashworth was discovered in his private study, seated at his desk as if he'd simply fallen asleep while examining a recently acquired manuscript. No signs of violence, no disturbance in the room. The local physician initially suspected a heart attack." Carter paused, and Blackwood could hear papers rustling. "However, there are inconsistencies, such as the manuscript he was examining, a medieval illuminated text worth a fortune, shows signs of having been handled by multiple people recently. Ashworth's personal secretary insists he never allowed others to touch his most valuable pieces. Furthermore, 3 of the house guests reported hearing strange sounds from the study around midnight, yet Ashworth wasn't discovered until morning." Eleanor stepped into the study, her brown eyes bright with curiosity. Blackwood nodded toward the chair opposite his desk, and she settled herself, producing her notebook with practiced efficiency. "Who discovered the body?" Blackwood inquired. "His nephew, Jonathan Ashworth." The young man had come down early for breakfast and noticed his uncle's study door ajar. Apparently, Ashworth was obsessive about keeping it locked. Carter's voice grew more troubled. "Detective, I've worked dozens of suspicious deaths, but this one, there's something calculated about it. Something that speaks to a mind far more devious than our typical criminals." Blackwood exchanged a meaningful glance with Eleanor. "You mentioned house guests, Inspector. Who else was present at Ravenshollow?" 7 individuals, all with varying relationships to Ashworth. "I can provide details, but frankly, Detective, I believe this case requires your particular expertise. The family is prominent, the potential scandal enormous, and I fear the local authorities may miss crucial evidence." The detective considered the implications. Isolated mountain estate, multiple suspects, valuable collections, and mysterious circumstances, the elements of a classical puzzle that appealed to his analytical nature. "Miss Hayes and I can depart tomorrow morning. Please wire ahead to arrange our accommodation and ensure the scene remains undisturbed." "Already done, Detective." I took the liberty of reserving rooms at the estate itself. Under the circumstances, I thought it best to keep everyone together until we understand what truly happened. After concluding the call, Blackwood turned to Eleanor, who had been transcribing the conversation with swift efficiency. "What are your initial thoughts, Miss Hayes?" "The timing troubles me. she replied, tapping her pen against her notebook. A manuscript being examined by multiple people, strange sounds at midnight, but the body not discovered until morning. Either someone is lying about when they last saw Mr. Ashworth alive, or ... or the death occurred much later than appearances suggest. Blackwood completed her thought. Precisely my thinking. We're dealing with someone who understands the importance of establishing false timelines. Eleanor consulted her notes. 7 house guests plus the nephew who discovered the body. In my experience, detective, such gatherings rarely occur without purpose. What brought all these people to Ravenshollow simultaneously? An excellent question. One that will undoubtedly prove central to our investigation. Blackwood rose and moved to the window, watching the rain continue its relentless assault on the city. Pack for an extended stay? Miss Hayes, something tells me this case will require considerable time to unravel. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, the storm having moved east toward the Atlantic. Blackwood and Eleanor caught the early train north, their compartment filled with case files Carter had forwarded overnight. As the locomotive wound through increasingly mountainous terrain, Eleanor studied the profiles of Ravenshollow's occupants. Dr. Victoria Sterling, she read aloud. Ashworth's personal physician, age 42, unmarried. She'd been treating him for a heart condition for the past 2 years. She looked up at Blackwood. Rather convenient for a doctor to be present when her patient dies of apparent heart failure. Indeed. Though equally convenient for establishing an innocent explanation. Blackwood accepted the file she offered. Continue. James Morrison, Ashworth's business partner in several art acquisition ventures. 45 years old, recently divorced. Significant financial difficulties according to Inspector Carter's notes. Eleanor flipped the page. Lady Margaret Pembroke, Ashworth's cousin from England. 63 years old, recently arrived in America under mysterious circumstances. Mysterious how? Carter's notes suggest she fled some sort of scandal in London, though details are vague. She's been staying at Ravenshollow for 3 weeks. Eleanor continued reading. Professor Heinrich Zimmermann, a German art historian. 58 years old. Expert in medieval manuscripts, particularly interesting given what Ashworth was examining when he died. Blackwood made notes in the margins as Eleanor continued. Rebecca Ashworth, the victim's daughter-in-law. 28 years old, widow of Ashworth's son who died in the war. She and young Jonathan are Ashworth's only surviving family, financial circumstances. Comfortable, though not wealthy by Ashworth standards. Jonathan recently graduated from Harvard Law School but hasn't yet established his practice. Eleanor turned the page. The final guest is Thomas Hartwell, Ashworth's personal secretary and estate manager. 35 years old, been with the family for 8 years. 7 suspects, each with potential access to Ashworth and intimate knowledge of his habits. Blackwood stared out at the passing wilderness. We must determine not only who had opportunity, but who possessed the specific knowledge necessary to orchestrate such an elaborate deception. The train began its final ascent toward the mountain station, steam hissing as the engine strained against the grade. Eleanor gathered the files, her expression thoughtful. Detective, something about this case feels different from our previous investigations. How so? The complexity suggests extensive planning, yet the execution seems almost ... theatrical, as if someone wanted the death to appear mysterious rather than simply undetected. Blackwood nodded approvingly. Your instincts serve you well? Miss Hayes, we may be dealing with a killer who desires recognition for their cleverness, a dangerous combination of intelligence and vanity. The train whistle announced their approach to Ravenshollow Station, a modest platform serving the handful of grand estates scattered throughout the mountains. Inspector Carter awaited them on the platform, his typically immaculate uniform showing signs of stress and sleepless nights. Detective Blackwood, Miss Hayes, thank you for coming so quickly. Carter shook hands with both, his relief evident. The situation has grown more complicated since we spoke. How so? Blackwood inquired as they walked toward a waiting automobile. 2 more incidents have occurred. Yesterday evening, Lady Pembroke claimed someone entered her room and searched through her belongings. Nothing was taken, but her private papers were disturbed. Carter helped Eleanor into the vehicle. This morning, Professor Zimmerman reported that someone had been examining his research notes on medieval manuscripts. Eleanor and Blackwood exchanged glances. Someone is looking for something specific, she observed. My thoughts exactly. Carter agreed as they began the winding drive toward Ravenshollow. The question is whether these incidents are connected to Ashworth's death or represent separate criminal activity. The estate appeared through the trees like something from a Gothic novel, a sprawling stone mansion, perched on a rocky outcrop, its turrets and towers silhouetted against the mountain sky. Ravenshollow had been built in the 1880s by Ashworth's father, designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. As their automobile crunched up the gravel drive, Eleanor couldn't suppress a shiver. Atmospheric, isn't it? Carter observed. The architect clearly favored drama over comfort, perfect setting for mysterious deaths and midnight searches. Blackwood murmured, I assume you've interviewed all the guests. Preliminary questioning only. I thought you'd prefer to conduct the formal interviews yourself. Carter parked near the main entrance, where a butler waited to receive them. Everyone remains at the estate, but several have expressed desire to leave. Under no circumstances should anyone depart until we've completed our investigation, Blackwood stated firmly. This is now officially a murder inquiry. Carter raised his eyebrows. Murder? The local physician still maintains Ashworth died of natural causes. Perhaps, Blackwood replied, stepping from the vehicle. But someone is certainly behaving as though they have much to hide. Whether that someone is our killer or merely an opportunistic thief remains to be determined. The butler, a dignified man of perhaps 60 years, approached with measured steps. Detective Blackwood? I am Whitmore. Sir, Mr. Ashworth's personal butler for the past 23 years. His voice carried the weight of genuine grief. I've prepared quarters for you and Miss Hayes as Inspector Carter requested. Thank you, Whitmore. I'll want to speak with you later about your employer's recent activities. Blackwood studied the man's face carefully. I understand this must be a difficult time for the household staff. Indeed, sir, Mr. Ashworth was a demanding employer, but a fair one. His death has shocked us all. Whitmore's composure slipped slightly, particularly given the strange occurrences of recent days. Strange how? Mr. Ashworth had been more anxious than usual, sir. He'd taken to locking his study even during the day, which was most unusual. And he'd been receiving telephone calls at odd hours, calls that seemed to disturb him greatly. Eleanor made quick notes while Blackwood pressed for details. Did you overhear any of these conversations? Only fragments, sir. References to the Italian matter and concerns about verification of authenticity. Mr. Ashworth deal in rare artworks, as you know, and such matters were not uncommon. However, his level of agitation was unprecedented. Carter interjected. Did he mention specific concerns about any of his house guests? Whitmore hesitated, glancing toward the mansion's windows as though fearing observation. Mr. Ashworth did express surprise at Lady Pembroke's extended visit. He'd originally invited her for a weekend, but she'd remained for weeks. I heard him mention to Mr. Hartwell that her presence was becoming ... inconvenient. In what way? Blackwood inquired. She'd been asking many questions about his collection, sir. Particularly the medieval manuscripts. Mr. Ashworth valued his privacy regarding his acquisitions, especially those of questionable provenance. Eleanor looked up sharply from her notes. Questionable provenance? Many collectors in Mr. Ashworth's position acquire pieces through channels that might not satisfy museum standards, Whitmore explained diplomatically. Nothing illegal, mind you, but perhaps not entirely transparent regarding previous ownership. Blackwood nodded, understanding the implications. The art world of the 1920s operated in moral gray areas, particularly regarding pieces displaced by the recent war. We'll want to examine his study and the manuscript he was reviewing when he died. Of course, sir. Inspector Carter has ensured nothing was disturbed. Whitmore began leading them toward the mansion's imposing entrance. I should mention, sir, that dinner is served at 8 o'clock. All the guests will be present. It might provide an opportunity for observation. Excellent. Suggestion. Blackwood paused at the threshold, looking back at the darkening mountains. Whitmore, in your opinion, did any of the house guests seem particularly interested in Mr. Ashworth's death? The butler considered carefully. Dr. Sterling has been most professional, naturally concerned about her patient's condition. Professor Zimmerman seems genuinely distressed. He and Mr. Ashworth shared scholarly interests. However, double quotes, he paused meaningfully. Yes? Mr. Morrison has been asking detailed questions about Mr. Ashworth's business affairs and the disposition of his collection. Rather quickly, if I may say so, for someone supposedly grieving a partner's death. As they entered Ravenshallow's grand foyer, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a carefully constructed trap. The mansion's shadows seemed to harbor secrets, and somewhere among the 7 suspects was a killer clever enough to murder a man in a room full of people without leaving a trace of evidence. The hunt for truth was about to begin, and Marcus Blackwood had never faced a more challenging quarry. The first evening at Ravenshollow would prove more revealing than any of them imagined. Asterisk. The dining room at Ravenshollow stretched beneath a vaulted ceiling adorned with medieval tapestries, their faded colors telling stories of ancient battles and forgotten victories. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the assembled guests as they gathered for dinner, each face a steady and carefully controlled emotion. Blackwood observed them all from his position at the head of the table, noting every gesture, every glance, every carefully measured word. Dr. Victoria Sterling sat rigidly upright, her silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. She wore black silk in deference to the deceased, though her clinical demeanor suggested professional obligation rather than genuine grief. Across from her, James Morrison fidgeted with his wineglass, his florid complexion betraying either guilt or excessive drinking, possibly both. Lady Margaret Pembroke commanded attention despite her advanced years, her aristocratic bearing unmistakable even in mourning attire. The emerald brooch at her throat caught the light with each breath, and Blackwood noted how her pale blue eyes never ceased their systematic survey of the room and its occupants. Beside her, Professor Zimmerman hunched over his soup, his thick spectacles reflecting the candlelight as he muttered occasional words in German. Rebecca Ashworth, the victim's daughter-in-law, possessed a fragile beauty that seemed almost ethereal in the flickering light. Her black dress accentuated her pallor, and she dabbed frequently at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Her stepson Jonathan sat protectively close, his young face grave beyond his 24 years. Thomas Hartwell, the estate manager, maintained his position near the door as though ready to flee at the first opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, Blackwood began, his cultured voice cutting through the subdued dinner conversation. I realize my presence here represents an intrusion during your time of mourning. However, the circumstances surrounding Mr. Ashworth's death require thorough investigation. Dr. Sterling set down her soup spoon with deliberate precision. Detective, I've already informed Inspector Carter that Reginald died of natural causes. His heart condition was well documented, and I'd been treating him for cardiac irregularities for over 2 years. Indeed, Dr. Sterling. Yet, I find it curious that a man with such a serious condition would choose to examine valuable manuscripts alone in his study at midnight. Blackwood's gray eyes fixed on hers, particularly when he knew the excitement of such discoveries could prove dangerous to his health. Morrison leaned forward, his jowls quivering with indignation. "Are you suggesting Reginald was murdered? That's preposterous. Who among us would want to harm a generous, cultured man like generous?" Lady Pembroke's crisp English accent cut through Morrison's protests like a blade through silk. "My dear Mr. Morrison, surely you're aware of the rather heated discussion Reginald and you had regarding the authenticity of the Caravaggio he purchased through your gallery?" The business partner's face flushed deeper. That was merely a professional disagreement about attribution. Such debates are common in our field. Eleanor, seated quietly beside Blackwood, made careful notes while observing the subtle interplay of accusation and defense. She'd learned to read the spaces between words, the telling glances that revealed more than any testimony. Professor Zimmerman looked up from his soup, his German accent thick with emotion. Reginald was a true scholar detective. He understood the importance of preserving medieval manuscripts for future generations. They spent many hours discussing the illuminated text he acquired recently, the very manuscript found with his body. "Tell me about this manuscript, Professor," Blackwood requested. Inspector Carter mentioned it showed signs of handling by multiple individuals. "Haha, this is most troubling." Zimmerman removed his spectacles and polished them nervously. "The manuscript is a 13th century book of hours, extremely valuable. Reginald was most careful with such pieces. He wore special gloves, used proper tools. Yet when I examined the scene, I noticed fingerprints on the vellum pages themselves." "Whose fingerprints?" Carter interjected from his position near the window. "That I cannot say. But someone handled this precious document without proper care, someone who either did not know its value or did not care about preserving it. Rebecca." Ashworth's voice trembled as she spoke for the first time. "Uncle Reginald was so excited about that manuscript. He said it contained some sort of code or hidden message that could revolutionize understanding of medieval history." She looked around the table with wide, frightened eyes. "What if someone killed him for it?" Jonathan reached for his stepmother's hand. "Rebecca, please don't upset yourself with such thoughts. Uncle Reginald had a weak heart, everyone knew that. Asterisk. But the sounds we heard at midnight," she insisted. "The voices from his study. Someone was with him when he died?" Blackwood's attention sharpened. "You heard voices, Mrs. Ashworth? Can you describe them? 2 people talking, maybe arguing?" I couldn't make out words, but one voice was definitely Uncle Reginald's. The other ... She hesitated, glancing around the table. The other was higher pitched, possibly a woman's voice. Dr. Sterling's fork clattered against her plate. "That's impossible." I retired to my room immediately after administering Reginald's evening medication at 9 o'clock. I heard nothing unusual. "When did you last see Z deceased alive?" Zimmerman asked the doctor, his scholarly curiosity overcoming social protocols. As I said, 9 o'clock when I gave him his heart medication. He seemed tired, but otherwise well. I specifically advised him against any strenuous activity or excitement. Sterling's professional mask slipped slightly. If he'd followed my instructions, he'd be alive today. Lady Pembroke dabbed her lips with her napkin, her movements elegant despite her age. "Doctor, you seem to be suggesting that poor Reginald brought his death upon himself. Rather harsh judgment from someone supposedly concerned with his welfare. I'm suggesting that patients who ignore medical advice face predictable consequences," Sterling replied coldly. "Reginald knew the risks of overexcitement. Yet he chose to examine that manuscript despite my explicit warnings about late-night activities. Morrison, emboldened by wine and indignation, pointed an accusatory finger across the table. "What about you, Margaret? You've been here for weeks, asking endless questions about Reginald's collection. Rather convenient that he dies just as you're preparing to return to England." Elderly woman's aristocratic composure never wavered. "Mr. Morrison, I've been cataloging family heirlooms for inheritance purposes at Reginald's specific request. Unlike some individuals at this table, my interest in his collection was entirely legitimate. What exactly do you mean by that?" Morrison demanded, his voice rising. "I mean that certain business associates had been pressuring Reginald to authenticate pieces of questionable provenance. Pieces that might have been looted from European museums during the recent unpleasantness." Lady Pembroke's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I warned him that such associations could prove dangerous." Eleanor noticed how Thomas Hartwell shifted uncomfortably at this exchange, his eyes darting between Morrison and Lady Pembroke. The secretary had remained silent throughout dinner, but his tension was palpable. Blackwood decided to press the estate manager. "Mr. Hartwell, you were responsible for managing Mr. Ashworth's business correspondence. Were you aware of any threats or unusual communications recently?" Hartwell cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Ashworth did receive several disturbing telephone calls in the weeks preceding his death. International calls, usually late at night. He wouldn't discuss their content, but they clearly agitated him." "From whom?" Carter inquired. "I don't know, sir. The calls came through the estate's main line, and Mr. Ashworth always took them privately in his study." Hartwell glanced around the table. "However, I did notice that these calls often occurred after Lady Pembroke's arrival. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from the dining room's massive fireplace." Lady Pembroke's eyes flashed with aristocratic disdain, but she maintained her composure. "Mr. Hartwell, are you suggesting I was somehow involved in mysterious telephone calls?" "I assure you, my correspondence with England has been entirely routine matters concerning my late husband's estate." Professor Zimmerman set down his wine glass with visible frustration. "This speculation accomplishes nothing. We must focus on the manuscripts. The key to everything lies there." Reginald believed it contained information about the location of lost medieval treasures, artifacts that disappeared during the war. Rebecca gasped. "Treasures? You mean the manuscript was some sort of treasure map?" "In a manner of speaking, yeah." The illuminated decorations veer not merely artistic contained coded references to hiding places used by monasteries during times of conflict. Such information would be immensely valuable to collectors and less scrupulous individuals. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression calculating. "How valuable are we talking, Professor?" "Millions of dollars, possibly. The manuscript itself is worth perhaps 50,000, but the information it contains ... double quotes. Zimmerman shrugged eloquently. "Priceless artifacts from the medieval period, hidden for centuries." Eleanor noticed how this revelation affected each dinner guest differently. Dr. Sterling maintained her clinical detachment, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. Morrison's eyes gleamed with barely concealed avarice, while Lady Pembroke appeared genuinely shocked by the manuscript's significance. Jonathan Ashworth broke the tense silence. If Uncle Reginald knew about these treasures, wouldn't he have pursued them himself? He wasn't the type to ignore such opportunities. "Perhaps he was," Zimmerman replied ominously. "Perhaps someone killed him to prevent that pursuit." Blackwood rose from his chair, his commanding presence focusing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we've heard enough for this evening. However, I must inform you that as of tomorrow morning, I'll be conducting formal interviews with each of you. I trust you'll make yourselves available." As the guests began to disperse, Eleanor approached Blackwood with her notebook. "Detective, the manuscript seems to be central to everything. Shouldn't we examine it more thoroughly?" "Indeed, Miss Hayes, but first I want to speak privately with Whitmore about those telephone calls. I suspect our butler knows more than Mr. Hartwell realizes." They found Whitmore in the kitchen, supervising the evening's cleanup with the efficiency of a military commander. The servants' quarters below stairs buzzed with subdued conversation as the staff discussed their employer's death and the detective's investigation. "Whitmore," Blackwood began, "I need complete honesty about Mr. Ashworth's activities in the days before his death." The butler nodded gravely. "Of course, sir. I've been expecting this conversation. The telephone calls Mr. Hartwell mentioned. Did you overhear any details?" "Some, sir. The calls were from Italy, I believe. Something about a monastery near Florence and documents that needed to be retrieved." Mr. Ashworth became quite excited about what he called the Vatican connection. Eleanor looked up from her notes. "Vatican connection?" "Apparently, sir, the manuscript contained references to artifacts hidden by monks during the sack of Rome in 1527, valuable religious items that were never recovered. Mr. Ashworth believed he'd discovered their location." Blackwood exchanged a meaningful glance with Eleanor. "Did anyone else know about these calls?" "Lady Pembroke, sir. I saw her listening at the study door on at least 2 occasions. When she noticed me observing, she claimed to be concerned about Mr. Ashworth's health, but Whitmore hesitated. Yes? She took notes, sir. I saw her writing in a small leather journal immediately after the calls ended. The implications were staggering. If Lady Pembroke had been gathering intelligence about the manuscript's contents, her presence at Ravenshollow took on an entirely different significance. Whitmore, did Mr. Ashworth ever express fear for his safety?" "Not directly, sir, but he did ask me to ensure all doors and windows were securely locked each night." "Most unusual for him." "And he began keeping a revolver in his study desk. I saw it when delivering his morning correspondence." Eleanor's pen raced across the pages. "Was this revolver found with his body?" "No, miss. Inspector Carter searched thoroughly, but found no weapon." Blackwood felt the familiar thrill of a case beginning to reveal its secrets. "Someone removed that revolver, Miss Hayes. The question is whether they used it to kill Ashworth or simply wanted to ensure he couldn't defend himself. As us." They climbed the servants' staircase to the main house. Eleanor voiced her growing concerns. "Detective, we're dealing with international intrigue, lost treasures, and someone clever enough to commit murder without leaving obvious evidence. This isn't a simple domestic killing. Asterisk, no," Blackwood agreed, pausing at the top of the stairs. "We're hunting someone with sophisticated knowledge of art, history, and human psychology. Someone who's been planning this crime for weeks, possibly months." The grandfather clock in the entrance hall chimed 11 times as they made their way to their respective quarters. Tomorrow would bring formal interviews and deeper investigation into the manuscript's secrets, but Blackwood already sensed they were racing against time. Somewhere in Ravenshollow, a killer was probably planning their next move, secure in the belief that they'd committed the perfect crime. But Marcus Blackwood had never encountered a perfect crime, and he had no intention of allowing this case to be his first failure. The truth lay hidden in the shadows of Ravenshollow, waiting to be discovered by a detective determined to illuminate even the darkest secrets. Dawn broke gray and forbidding over the Adirondack Mountains, casting long shadows through Ravenshallow's mullioned windows. Detective Marcus Blackwood stood in Reginald Ashworth's private study, examining the scene where death had claimed the renowned collector 3 nights earlier. The room remained precisely as Inspector Carter had found it, leather-bound volumes lining mahogany shelves, Persian carpets muffling footsteps, and the medieval manuscripts still spread across the massive oak desk like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Eleanor. Hayes entered quietly, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and her ever-present notebook. The household is stirring, Detective. I've arranged for interviews to begin at 9 o'clock, starting with Dr. Sterling. Excellent. Blackwood accepted the coffee gratefully, his keen eyes never leaving the illuminated manuscript. Miss Hayes observed these decorative borders carefully. Professor Zimmerman claimed they contained coded information, but I believe there's more here than even he realized. Eleanor leaned closer, studying the intricate gold leaf and vibrant pigments that adorned the ancient vellum. The angel figures seemed to be pointing in specific directions, and these Latin inscriptions. They're not standard religious texts, precisely. Someone with extensive knowledge of medieval symbolism created a sophisticated cipher. Blackwood traced the margin decorations with his finger, careful not to touch the precious surface. Each illuminated capital contains numerical sequences disguised as decorative elements. This isn't merely a treasure map, it's a complete inventory of artifacts hidden throughout Europe during the Renaissance. Worth killing for? Without question. The information contained here could lead to discoveries that would reshape understanding of medieval art and culture. Blackwood straightened, his expression grim. More importantly, it could generate tens of millions of dollars for someone unscrupulous enough to loot historical sites. Inspector Carter appeared in the doorway, his uniform impeccable despite the early hour. Detective, I've stationed constables at all exits as you requested. No one leaves Ravenshollow without your permission. Good. Our killer is growing desperate, Inspector. Last night's searches of Lady Pembroke's and Professor Zimmerman's rooms suggest someone believes crucial evidence remains hidden. Blackwood moved to the desk where Ashworth had died. Have you discovered anything about those international telephone calls? Indeed. I contacted the telephone exchange, and they confirmed multiple calls from Florence, Italy over the past month. All to a monastery called San Lorenzo, apparently. One of the locations referenced in the manuscript. Eleanor looked up from her notes with excitement. Detective, that means Mr. Ashworth was in direct contact with people who could verify the manuscript's authenticity and provide additional information about hidden treasures. Or, Blackwood observed darkly, people who wanted to prevent him from pursuing those treasures. International conspiracies often involve eliminating inconvenient obstacles. At precisely 9 o'clock, Dr. Victoria Sterling entered the study with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Her silver hair was arranged in a severe bun, and her black medical bag suggested she'd come prepared for any eventuality. She settled into the chair across from Blackwood's position behind Ashworth's desk, her posture rigidly professional. Dr. Sterling, Blackwood began, his tone conversational but his eyes watchful. You've been treating Mr. Ashworth for heart disease. In your medical opinion, could excitement over a significant discovery trigger a fatal cardiac episode? Absolutely. Reginald suffered from severe coronary artery disease, complicated by irregular heartbeat. Any substantial emotional or physical stress could prove lethal. Sterling's clinical demeanor never wavered. I repeatedly warned him to avoid situations that might elevate his heart rate or blood pressure, yet he continued to pursue potentially dangerous activities like examining valuable manuscripts late at night. Unfortunately, yes. Reginald was intellectually curious to a fault. He often ignored medical advice when it conflicted with his scholarly interests. The doctor's voice carried a note of professional frustration. I told him repeatedly that his condition was deteriorating, but he refused to modify his behavior appropriately. Eleanor interjected gently. Dr. Sterling, you administered his evening medication at 9 o'clock on the night he died. Did you notice anything unusual about his demeanor or physical condition? Nothing beyond his typical excitement when discussing new acquisitions. His pulse was elevated, but not dangerously so. and his breathing seemed normal. Sterling paused, her professional mask slipping slightly. However, I did observe that he seemed furtive, as though he were concealing something significant. Blackwood leaned forward with interest. Concealing what, exactly? I'm not certain, but when I entered his study to administer medication, he quickly covered the manuscript with other papers. Most unusual behavior for someone typically eager to discuss his latest discoveries. Sterling's eyes narrowed with memory. He also asked me specific questions about drug interactions and timing of cardiac medications. What sort of questions? Whether his heart medication could be detected in postmortem examination, how long various drugs remained active in the bloodstream, and whether certain combinations might mask symptoms of poisoning. The doctor's voice grew troubled. At the time, I assumed he was experiencing anxiety about his condition, but now ... double quotes, Eleanor and Blackwood exchanged significant glances. Dr. Sterling, are you suggesting Mr. Ashworth suspected someone might attempt to poison him? Possibly. He also asked me to examine his food before he ate anything, claiming he'd been experiencing unusual drowsiness after meals. Sterling's clinical composure cracked entirely. Detective, I fear I may have failed him as his physician. If he suspected danger and I dismissed his concerns ... full quote, what exactly did you dismiss? Carter asked from his position near the window. Paranoid fantasies, or so I thought. Reginald claimed someone had been entering his study at night, moving papers and examining his collections. He insisted that valuable items had been photographed without his knowledge. Sterling's hands trembled slightly. I attributed these concerns to medication side effects and underlying anxiety about his deteriorating health. Asterisk Blackwood made careful notes while Eleanor observed the doctor's body language. Something about Sterling's testimony felt incomplete, as though she were omitting crucial details. Dr. Sterling, did Mr. Ashworth mention specific individuals he suspected of these alleged intrusions? The doctor hesitated, her professional ethics clearly warring with investigative necessity. He expressed concerns about certain house guests who seemed overly interested in his manuscript collection. Which guests specifically? Lady Pembroke primarily. He found her persistent questions about family heirlooms suspicious, particularly given her extended stay. He also worried about Professor Zimmerman's intense interest in the medieval manuscript and James Morrison's financial difficulties. Eleanor leaned forward. Did he suspect any of these individuals of planning to harm him? Not directly, but he did ask me whether certain heart medications, if withheld suddenly, could trigger fatal cardiac episodes. Sterling's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He specifically asked about digitalis toxicity and whether someone with medical knowledge could manipulate his condition without detection. The implications hung heavy in the morning air. If Ashworth suspected medical sabotage, his own physician became an obvious suspect, someone with both knowledge and opportunity to orchestrate his death while maintaining the appearance of natural causes. Blackwood pressed his advantage. Dr. Sterling, where did you go after administering Mr. Ashworth's evening medication? Directly to my room, where I remained until morning. I took a sleeping powder around 10 o'clock and slept soundly until dawn. Her answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Can anyone verify your whereabouts? I know. I was alone in my room all night. Sterling's confidence began to crumble. Detective, surely you don't suspect me of harming my own patient? I suspect everyone, doctor, until evidence proves otherwise. Blackwood's tone remained neutral. You mentioned taking a sleeping powder. Rather unusual for a physician to self-medicate with substances that could impair professional judgment in case of emergency. I'd been experiencing difficulty sleeping since arriving at Ravenshollow. The mountain air and unfamiliar surroundings ... double quotes. Sterling's explanation trailed off. Unconvincingly, Eleanor made a note about the sleeping powder, recognizing it as potentially significant. A physician claiming deep sleep provided convenient alibi, while simultaneously explaining why she might not have heard any midnight disturbances. Dr. Sterling, one final question. In your professional opinion, could someone have administered a substance that would simulate natural heart failure while remaining undetectable in routine examination? The doctor's face paled visibly. Several cardiac medications, if administered in precise dosages, could trigger fatal arrhythmias while leaving minimal forensic evidence. However, such an approach would require extensive medical knowledge and access to controlled substances. Knowledge and access you possess? Yes, but I would never. Sterling stopped abruptly, realizing the implications of her admission. After dismissing the shaken physician, Blackwood turned to Eleanor with satisfaction. Our good doctor knows far more than she's revealing. Miss Hayes, her testimony raises as many questions as it answers. Agreed. The sleeping powder alibi seems particularly convenient, and her knowledge of untraceable poisons is troubling. Eleanor consulted her notes. Should we interview Professor Zimmerman next? Indeed. If Sterling represents medical expertise in service of murder, Zimmerman embodies the scholarly knowledge necessary to understand the manuscript's true significance. Professor Heinrich Zimmerman entered the study with the shambling gait of someone more comfortable among dusty archives than crime scenes. His thick spectacles reflected the morning light, and his rumpled clothing suggested he'd slept poorly, or perhaps not at all. Professor, Blackwood began, your expertise in medieval manuscripts makes you uniquely qualified to assess this document's importance. In your opinion, why would someone kill to possess it? This manuscript represents the culmination of decades of scholarly research, Zimmerman replied, his German accent thickening with emotion. The coded information it contains could revolutionize understanding of medieval art preservation and lead to discoveries worth millions of dollars. You've examined the coding system personally? Yeah, extensively. The monks who created this document veer incredibly sophisticated in their approach to information concealment. Each illuminated letter corresponds to geographical coordinates. Each decorative border contains inventory lists, and the religious imagery masks detailed architectural descriptions of hiding places. Eleanor looked up from her notes. Professor, how many people possess the expertise necessary to decode this information? Perhaps a dozen scholars worldwide, no more. The combination of medieval Latin, Renaissance symbolism, and mathematical cryptography requires very specialized knowledge. Zimmerman removed his spectacles and polished them nervously. I am perhaps the only person in America with the complete skill set necessary for full interpretation, making you invaluable to anyone seeking the hidden treasures, Blackwood observed, or dangerous to anyone hoping to keep their location secret. Precisely via why I fear for my safety, Detective. Someone has been searching my research materials, and I suspect the event to determine how much I have decoded. Carter stepped forward from his position by the window. Professor, you reported hearing unusual sounds from Mr. Ashworth's study on the night he died. Can you describe them more specifically? Raised voices, definitely. One thus clearly Reginald, the other ... Higher pitched, as the young lady Rebecca mentioned. But there was something else, say sound of papers being shuffled rapidly, as though someone were searching through documents. What time did these sounds occur? Shortly after midnight, I believe. I had been working late on my translation notes when the commotion began. Zimmerman's expression grew troubled. The argument seemed to concern the manuscript's authenticity and whether certain claims about its origins could be verified. Blackwood leaned forward with interest. What sort of claims, Professor? Reginald had been corresponding with contacts in Italy who claimed the manuscript was stolen from the Vatican library during the war. If true, this would make legal ownership extremely complicated and potentially criminal. Eleanor's pen raced across her notebook. Are you saying Mr. Ashworth might have unknowingly purchased stolen religious artifacts? Not unknowingly, he was quite aware of the manuscript's questionable provenance, but he believed he could establish legitimate ownership through scholarly publication and cultural preservation arguments. Zimmerman's voice carried genuine distress. Such legal maneuvering often fails when dealing with Vatican property claims. Professor, Blackwood pressed. In your expert opinion, could someone have used the manuscript's coded information to locate and loot historical sites before Mr. Ashworth could pursue legal channels? Absolutely. The information is precise enough to guide excavation efforts, and the current political instability in Europe makes unauthorized archaeological activity relatively easy to conduct without detection. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, during which Zimmerman revealed his growing certainty that Ashworth's death was connected to international art smuggling operations. By the time the scholar departed, Blackwood had added several crucial pieces to his emerging understanding of the case. Miss Hayes, we're dealing with something far more complex than domestic murder, he observed as they prepared for the next interview. This case involves international crime, religious artifacts, and people willing to kill for access to centuries-old treasures. The question remains, which of our suspects possesses both the necessary knowledge and the moral flexibility to commit murder for profit? Indeed, but I'm beginning to suspect our killer may be someone who's been planning this crime for months, possibly years. Blackwood straightened his tie and checked his pocket watch. Time to interview Lady Margaret Pembroke. If my suspicions are correct, her aristocratic facade conceals the most dangerous criminal mind we've encountered. As if summoned by his words, Lady Pembroke appeared in the doorway with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Her silver hair was arranged in an elegant chignon, and her black mourning dress was cut in the latest London fashion. Despite her advanced years, her pale blue eyes sparkled with intelligence and something that might have been amusement. Detective Blackwood, she said in her crisp English accent, I understand you wish to discuss my extended visit to Ravenshollow. I assure you, my interest in deer, Reginald's collections, was entirely familial in nature, but as she settled into the chair across from the detective, Blackwood noticed how her gaze lingered on the medieval manuscript, and how her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as she arranged her skirts. Lady Margaret Pembroke was about to become the focus of the most crucial interview yet, and Marcus Blackwood sensed that the truth about Reginald Ashworth's death lay hidden behind her aristocratic smile. Asterisk Lady Margaret Pembroke arranged herself in the chair with practiced elegance, but Detective Marcus Blackwood noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she smoothed her black silk gloves. Her aristocratic composure remained intact, yet something in her pale blue eyes suggested a woman carrying the weight of dangerous secrets. Lady Pembroke, Blackwood began, his tone deceptively casual. Your extended stay at Ravenshollow has raised questions among the other guests. What originally brought you to America? Family obligations, Detective. My late husband left certain complications in his estate that required personal attention to resolve. Her crisp English accent carried undertones of carefully controlled tension. Reginald was kind enough to offer hospitality while I conducted necessary business. Eleanor observed from her position near the window, noting how Lady Pembroke's gaze repeatedly drifted toward the medieval manuscript spread across Ashworth's desk. The woman's interest seemed far more intense than casual curiosity warranted. What sort of complications? Blackwood pressed gently. Financial irregularities involving art acquisitions during the recent war. My husband, Lord Pembroke, had been overly enthusiastic in his collecting during his diplomatic service in Italy. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Certain pieces in his collection proved to have questionable provenance, including items that may have belonged to the Vatican. Lady Pembroke's composure cracked slightly. Detective, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I'm implying that your husband may have acquired stolen religious artifacts, and that you came to America to negotiate their return or sale through your cousin Reginald's connections. Blackwood's gray eyes never left her face. The medieval manuscript currently on this desk was one such piece, wasn't it? The silence stretched taut as Lady Pembroke weighed her options. Finally, her shoulders sagged in defeat. Yes, the manuscript was among several items that disappeared from the Vatican library. During the Allied occupation of Rome, my husband acquired them through unofficial channels. Eleanor leaned forward, sensing the breakthrough. You came to America to return stolen property? To negotiate its return, yes. The Vatican had contacted British authorities about recovering their missing treasures, and my husband's collection was under investigation when he died. I hoped Reginald could facilitate a discreet resolution that would avoid scandal. Lady Pembroke's voice grew bitter. Instead, I discovered he intended to exploit the manuscript's coded information for his own profit. Blackwood felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So you weren't here to steal the manuscript, you were trying to prevent its exploitation. Precisely. The Vatican authorities had made clear that anyone trafficking in stolen religious artifacts would face severe consequences. I tried to convince Reginald to return the manuscript quietly, but he refused. He'd already decoded enough information to identify several treasure locations, and the midnight argument Mrs. Rebecca Ashworth overheard. Reginald and I, yes. I'd received a telephone call from Rome warning that Vatican agents were prepared to take direct action if their property wasn't returned. Immediately, Lady Pembroke's hands trembled more visibly. I begged him to reconsider, but he claimed the treasures belonged to scholarship rather than religious institutions. Eleanor made rapid notes while Blackwood processed this revelation. Lady Pembroke, did you kill Reginald Ashworth to prevent him from pursuing those treasures? No. The denial came with genuine force. I left his study in frustration around 12:30, after our argument reached an impasse. Reginald was very much alive when I departed, though clearly agitated. Can you prove your whereabouts after leaving the study? I returned directly to my room and remained there until morning. However, She hesitated significantly. Yes. I heard footsteps in the corridor shortly after I retired, and whispered conversation near Reginald's study door. Someone else visited him after our confrontation. Blackwood leaned back, considering the implications. Lady Pembroke's testimony provided crucial context, but didn't eliminate her as a suspect. Her motive preventing international scandal was arguably stronger than simple greed. Detective, she continued urgently, you must understand that Reginald's death has created a diplomatic crisis. The Vatican is demanding immediate return of their manuscript, and British authorities are pressuring me to resolve the situation quickly. If the killer isn't found soon, what will happen? Vatican agents will arrive to recover their property by force, regardless of American legal jurisdiction. They view this as theft of sacred relics, not a mere civil matter. Eleanor looked up from her notes with alarm. Are you saying we're dealing with international religious authorities who operate outside normal legal channels? The Vatican's methods for recovering stolen artifacts are ... direct. They've been pursuing these items for years, and they won't allow American domestic concerns to impede their mission. Lady Pembroke's aristocratic facade finally crumbled entirely. Detective, I fear we're all in terrible danger if this matter isn't resolved immediately. After dismissing Lady Pembroke, Blackwood turned to Eleanor with grim satisfaction. We're dealing with multiple layers of deception. Miss Hayes, the question now is whether our killer was working for personal profit international interests, or something else entirely. The Vatican connection complicates everything, Eleanor observed. If they have agents willing to use force... Indeed. But I believe our murderer is someone far closer to home, someone who understood both Ashworth's vulnerability and the manuscript's true value. Blackwood checked his pocket watch. Time for our final interviews. I want to speak with James Morrison and Thomas Hartwell together. Their reactions to direct confrontation should prove illuminating. Morrison and Hartwell entered the study with obvious reluctance, their contrasting personalities evident in every gesture. Morrison's florid complexion and expensive clothing marked him as a man accustomed to comfortable living, while Hartwell's nervous demeanor and worn suit suggested someone perpetually anxious about his position. Gentlemen, Blackwood began without preamble. I believe one of you killed Reginald Ashworth to gain control of information that could generate millions in illegal profits, Morrison sputtered indignantly. Detective, that's an outrageous accusation. Reginald was my business partner and friend. You would never pass up an opportunity to exploit valuable artifacts for personal gain. Blackwood interrupted coldly. Your gallery has dealt in pieces of questionable provenance before. Mr. Morrison, the Caravaggio that Lady Pembroke mentioned was only one example. Hartwell shifted uncomfortably as Morrison's face reddened with anger. My business practices are entirely legitimate. Any suggestions otherwise are supported by documentary evidence. Eleanor produced a folder from her bag. Inspector Carter's investigation revealed that your gallery has been under investigation for trafficking in stolen European artworks for the past 2 years. That's completely false. But Morrison's bluster lacked conviction. Blackwood turned his attention to the secretary. Mr. Hartwell, as estate manager, you had unlimited access to Mr. Ashworth's private correspondence and business affairs. You knew about the Vatican manuscript, the coded treasure information, and the international pressure to return stolen artifacts. Yes, sir, but I would never betray Mr. Ashworth's trust. He was a fair employer and I, you what? Needed money desperately to support your gambling debts. Eleanor consulted her notes. Inspector Carter discovered significant financial irregularities in the estate accounts money that you've been systematically embezzling for months. Hartwell's face went ashen. I can explain those discrepancies. There were legitimate expenses, such as payments to bookmakers and racetracks throughout New York State. Blackwood's voice carried the authority of complete certainty. Mr. Hartwell, you've been stealing from your employer to fund a gambling addiction that has left you thousands of dollars in debt to very dangerous people. The secretary's composure collapsed entirely. Please, detective, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. Those men threatened my family if I didn't repay what I owed them. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Morrison backed away from his companion in horror. Thomas, what have you done? I didn't kill him. Hartwell protested desperately. I needed money, yes, but I would never murder Mr. Ashworth. Blackwood studied both men carefully, reading their body language and emotional responses. After several minutes of intense questioning, he dismissed them with instructions not to leave the estate. Miss Hayes, he said once they were alone, our investigation has revealed motives, means, and opportunities for multiple suspects, but the truth remains elusive. Someone is lying with exceptional skill, or multiple people are lying about different aspects of the case, Eleanor suggested. Perhaps we're dealing with overlapping crimes rather than a single conspiracy. Precisely my thoughts. It's time to gather everyone together for the final revelation. Blackwood moved to the desk where the medieval manuscript lay spread like an accusation. But first, I need to examine one final piece of evidence that will identify our killer beyond any doubt. He opened the manuscript to a specific page, studying the illuminated decorations with intense concentration. Suddenly, his expression changed to one of complete understanding. Miss Hayes, observe this particular section carefully. The gold leaf has been disturbed recently. Someone has been scraping samples for analysis. Eleanor leaned closer. Testing the authenticity of the materials? No, testing for something far more sinister. Blackwood produced a magnifying glass and examined the manuscript's surface under intense scrutiny. These aren't tool marks from authentication testing. Someone has been applying chemical compounds to specific areas of the parchment. What sort of chemicals? Substances that would react with certain cardiac medications to create fatal interactions. Someone has been using this manuscript as a delivery system for murder. Blackwood's voice carried grim satisfaction. Our killer has been far more clever than we imagined and far more ruthless. Within the hour, all residents of Ravenshollow had assembled in the library, their faces reflecting various degrees of anxiety, guilt, and curiosity. Blackwood stood before the massive fireplace, the medieval manuscript displayed on a nearby table like evidence in a medieval trial. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his cultured voice carrying clearly through the vaulted room. 3 nights ago, Reginald Ashworth was murdered in his study by someone he trusted completely. The killer used intimate knowledge of his medical condition and daily habits to orchestrate a death that appeared entirely natural. Dr. Sterling shifted nervously in her chair. "Detective, I've already explained that Reginald died of heart failure. There's no evidence of foul play, asterisk. On the contrary, doctor, there's abundant evidence once one knows where to look." Blackwood lifted the manuscript carefully. "This document has been systematically contaminated with concentrated digitalis extract, applied to specific areas that Mr. Ashworth was known to touch during his examinations." Gasps echoed throughout the room as the implications became clear. The killer knew that Mr. Ashworth always handled valuable manuscripts without gloves when he was alone, despite proper conservation protocols. Digitalis absorbed through the skin would interact fatally with his existing heart medication, creating precisely the symptoms observed. Eleanor stepped forward with additional evidence. Furthermore, the killer removed Mr. Ashworth's revolver from his study to ensure he couldn't defend himself if he realized what was happening. But who had the knowledge and access necessary for such an elaborate murder? Morrison demanded. Blackwood's gray eyes surveyed the assembled suspects with cold precision. Someone with detailed medical knowledge, unlimited access to the victim, and intimate familiarity with his daily routines. Someone who could apply the poison without detection and remove evidence afterward. He paused dramatically, allowing tension to build throughout the room. Someone who had been planning this murder for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity provided by the medieval manuscript investigation. Asterisk, all eyes turned toward Dr. Victoria Sterling, whose face had gone completely white. "You killed Reginald Ashworth, Dr. Sterling. You used your medical expertise and his trust in you to commit what you believed would be the perfect crime. That's impossible." Sterling protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I was his physician. Why would I harm my own patient?" "Because," Eleanor continued, consulting her notes, "Inspector Carter's investigation revealed that you've been embezzling from Mr. Ashworth's medical trust fund for years. When he discovered your theft, you killed him to prevent exposure and prosecution. Furthermore," Blackwood added relentlessly, "you've been selling information about his valuable collections to international art dealers, including several organizations with connections to wartime looting operations." Dr. Sterling's professional composure finally shattered completely. "You can't prove any of this. It's all speculation and circumstantial evidence." "Actually, doctor, we can prove everything." Inspector Carter stepped forward from his position near the door, handcuffs ready. "Chemical analysis of the manuscript confirmed digitalis contamination. and your fingerprints were found on Mr. Ashworth's private safe prints that had no medical justification. Moreover, Blackwood continued with quiet satisfaction. The sleeping powder you claimed to have taken was found hidden in your room, never used. You needed to remain alert to monitor the effects of your poison and remove evidence if necessary. Double quotes. Dr. Sterling looked around the room desperately, seeking escape or support that would never come. Finally, her shoulders sagged in defeat. He was going to ruin me, she whispered. 20 years of medical practice destroyed because of accounting irregularities that were never intended to harm anyone. I needed that money to support my research, to help patients who couldn't afford proper care. So you murdered him, Blackwood stated flatly. I never meant for it to happen that way. I only wanted to incapacitate him temporarily to buy time to replace the missing funds. But his heart was weaker than I realized, and the digitalis concentration ... Her voice trailed off into horrified silence. Inspector. Carter stepped forward with the handcuffs. Dr. Victoria Sterling, you're under arrest for the murder of Reginald Ashworth. As the shamed physician was led away, the remaining guests sat in stunned silence. Justice had been served, but the cost a man's life and a woman's career weighed heavily on everyone. Present Lady Pembroke was the first to speak. Detective Blackwood, what will happen to the Vatican manuscript? It will be returned to its rightful owners immediately, he replied firmly. Some treasures are worth more than money. They belong to humanity's cultural heritage. Eleanor closed her notebook with satisfaction. Another case solved, another killer brought to justice. But as they prepared to leave Ravenshollow, she couldn't shake the feeling that this investigation had revealed darker truths about human nature than any of them had expected to confront. The medieval manuscript would return to Rome, the stolen artifacts would be recovered, and Dr. Victoria Sterling would face trial for murder. Justice had prevailed, as it always did when Marcus Blackwood applied his brilliant deductive powers to the mysteries that plagued human society, but the shadows of Ravenshollow would remember the echo of secrets, lies, and murder for years to come.